Hello, beautiful people. This is Nick Bradley from Rain Room Productions, and today I'm going to help you get started making your very first beat. If you've never made a beat before and you're trying to figure that shit out, I'm here to help you. You found the right video. You don't need to know a bunch of music theory in order to get started. Ableton has some handy tools that'll help you along the way, and I'm going to show you how to use those tools today. So let's get right into the video. Okay, so before we do anything here in Ableton, we're going to need to get a couple of samples. Ableton does come with loops on its own if you download them from the packs. I downloaded all of them. So some of these are instruments, some of them are samples. You can look on Google just for free samples. You can purchase samples and loops from like your favorite producers, as well as you can just go on Reddit and go our loop kits, and that has some stuff that can help get you started as well. Today I'm going to be using Splice just because that seems to be one of the most common ways that people find samples. So I'm just going to type in guitar loop. At the beginning of the video I was mentioning about a little bit of music theory, so this is just some basic stuff. So over here you can see the key is an A sharp. This will come into play a little bit later once I show you a couple things on the piano roll in Ableton. And then the BPM is another thing that you'll want to look at, and we can match the BPM in Ableton to the sample, or we can change the sample to match a BPM that we want in Ableton. So I'm just going to go through a few of these and find one that I like. I think I like that one. I'm going to look for a little bit longer and maybe we'll find something else we like, but I grabbed that one. Okay, so I'm going to grab this one as well because you can see these are both in the same key, so we don't have to worry too much about matching them up. So I'm going to look for another one in D major. Too aggressive. I think that's probably good for now. So we'll hop back into Ableton. After you download them, you can just drag them right into your project. Kind of nice. It has it all laid out right on the top bar here. 80 BPM D major guitar loop. And right now I have my samples set to not be warped. That just means that when I drag samples in, they're not going to automatically adjust the sample length to the tempo of the song. The next thing I'm going to do is add a couple of MIDI channels, and we're going to load up Ableton's Simpler. So type it into the search bar, Simpler. We're going to throw that on both of these MIDI tracks. And now I'm going to throw each of these loops into a Simpler. The nice thing about the Simpler, you can slice it up based on either the transient, the beat, region, or manually you can insert these markers here. Let's try beat. Looks like every half note. So you don't even really need a keyboard. You can just play it right in on your keys on your laptop. So if you don't know what your tempo is going to be off the top of your head, you can just feel it out and then you can tap. I'm gonna have it warped, but now I want it half the length. So this right here, this 2 with the dot beside it, will half the length of the sample. This will double it. So basically you just play around with it until you find something that you like, and then we'll throw a beat on it as well. All I did was turn on the metronome and hit play so that the metronome was ticking while I was playing away. And a little thing that Ableton has, which for me, I find it takes the pressure off of playing things in rather than hitting the record button when you're ready to play. Even when you're just messing around while listening to the metronome, Ableton's actually recording. So if you hit this little square button up in the top corner here, this will capture anything that you were playing just then in MIDI. So let's see what I got here. There was a couple things that I didn't like, a couple mistakes, so I just deleted the mistakes and moved this one note here. It has to be in front of the line just because that's where the MIDI track actually starts. Otherwise Ableton doesn't recognize it. So now it plays. And I played pretty far behind the beat, and I kind of like that, so I'm going to leave it how it is. But you can go in and zoom in, and you can adjust notes if you want to be closer to the grid here. So we have a little 8-bar loop, and right now we're not going to think too much about what all these divisions mean, but just briefly, basically these lines going horizontally correspond to the notes. Okay, so the notes on the piano roll are horizontal, and then the vertical lines correspond to the beats per bar. So right now we are playing this in 4/4. This means that there are 4 beats per bar in the 4/4 time signature. So 4 beats per bar, and when you zoom in, the divisions get smaller. So we don't need to worry too much about the time signature right now. All we're gonna do is load up the sample into the simpler, just like I showed you, and you're just gonna hit play with the metronome on, and then you're gonna try and play in time as the metronome is ticking. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna make a beat for our sample. So we have an 8-bar loop at the moment, and we're gonna try and throw a beat into there. For me personally, the drum beat seems to be the biggest deciding factor on the feel of the song. There's a couple things you can do. If you want, you can just load up a kit. You can do an empty drum rack, so we'll drag it over to a MIDI track, or you can just pick any of these. They're usually kind of hectic, so I tend to make my own kick. Now, as you can see here right now, down in this corner in the drum rack, I loaded it up. With the drum rack, sometimes it'll be playing way up here. If you can see this little yellow dot, and you won't get any sound. That's just because all of your sounds are down in this section here. So if that ever happens to you, if you're ever playing and you're like, what the heck, I'm not getting any sound, all you have to do is hit either Z or X. And as you can see, I'm hitting the same key, but I'm hitting X. And what the X button does is it raises the range in which you're playing in, and Z lowers the range. So now the first thing I'm going to start with is going to be a kick drum. So I have some on Ableton already, so I'm going to look up a kick in the search bar. And I'm just going to play the loop as I'm looking, because sometimes it helps to be able to hear what the drums are going to sound like with your idea that's already set out. So I'm going to do this for a minute here. Okay, so I think I like this one here. One thing that I tend to do, and this may not be the best practice, throw a limiter on the master for now, just so that we can avoid clipping. I'm gonna mess around and just come up with a good kick line, and then we'll do the kick and the snare together. One little tip, when you're searching for samples in Ableton, you can scroll using the up and down arrows, and you can play the sample using the right arrow. So when you're searching for samples, you can just play along and see if it sounds good with your sound. So I'm gonna use that one. Okay, so I'm just gonna give this a try here. I don't always play in drum samples, so this is gonna take me a minute to fix them up, but it's nice to do it this way once in a while. If you can actually practice and get good at it, but I always just opt to program them in so you can double click and place samples wherever you want. So we got that sounding okay, and this stuff here, like sometimes it's okay if it's a little bit off the grid, but if you can see, it snaps back onto the grid if you pull it over. But if you hold Alt and drag, you can drag it off the grid. It's nice to play the notes in first on your keyboard and then adjust them afterwards, just because it gives it a little bit more of a human feel and doesn't sound so robotic. Either way, you're going to spend time programming the notes in and moving them off the grid so they sound more human, or you can play them in and move them closer to the grid if you're too far off. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is add a new MIDI track. And to add a MIDI track, you can either right click and insert MIDI track, or you can go Control Shift T, or on Mac it would be Command Shift T. So next we're looking for a hi-hat. So I liked what I did on the second half of that. So basically I just click, Control or Command click, and drag over, and it copies it over there. So one thing that you can do is adjust the velocity range here. So I just brought it down -30. So it's very subtle, but it gives it a little bit more of a human feel. And what you can see down here barely is these highlights. So I'll just drag this down a bit more so you can see. So the further down you drag the velocity range, it just kind of gives you a visual representation down here. You can also manually adjust the maximum velocity. So that just means that how hard it's going to hit. Just going to do -30. And it's just a more subtle volume change. So the next thing we're going to work on here is going to be the bass line. The bass line tends to loosely follow the kick pattern. And I think in this case, that's exactly what we're going to do. So I'm just going to look through the presets for a bass instrument that sounds good. Okay, so this should work for the purposes of this video. Basically with the bass, now we're going to double click here. So this double click opens up the piano roll. You can also double click the track and then click down here over to the piano roll. So the easiest thing when we're doing the bass line now, you're in the piano roll. Over here, we have this function scale. Okay, so click this button. Now you have C major currently. All we have to do is click here, D major. And now these highlighted notes are in the scale that goes with the key that this sample is in. What I normally do is just fold it down to the scale size, and now all of those notes are in the right key, and you don't have to worry about anything. Except for making something that sounds good. In this case, I'm not gonna be playing in the bass line. I'm gonna write it in with my mouse. So in this case, I'm kind of trying to complement the kick and the melody at the same time. Because the kick is not a very straight kick, I'm just trying to work around what I did to myself. Okay, so we have a little bass line here. Some of it I lined up with the kick, some of it I lined up with the little loop. Filled in a couple of little spaces that were missing. So this is just a very basic outline. So let's just give it a quick listen. Okay, now we have our bass. So we're gonna add in a little counter melody, just to fill in some of the space here, because it's, to me right now, it seems like obviously this guitar is quite low and soft, which is good for lo-fi, and I like that, but I'm feeling like we can add a little bit more in here to make it more interesting. I'm gonna look for another little instrument. So I found my preset. This is one of my favorite presets. I use this a lot, actually. And by the way, when I'm adding in a MIDI track, you don't have to do this for audio. Actually, you can't do this for audio, and you don't need to. But for MIDI, you can highlight a section, Control or Command Shift M, and that'll create your track here like this. So you can play anything in, you can move it around, cut it up, and move it, do whatever you want. So I'm just gonna mess around for a minute. Now we have a bit of a counter melody, makes it a little bit more interesting, and I have this preset comes with a lot of reverb, so it really fills out the space nicely. You can hear how it's ringing out. And now we have a pretty solid start for an 8-bar loop. That's pretty much it. That's about all you need in order to get started making a beat today as a beginner. Feel free to go back and watch the video again and follow the steps. The biggest thing to remember is to make sure when you're looking for your sample, the sample is displaying the key. So this one was in D major, and just make sure you're using that piano roll trick that I showed you. I feel like this is a really good starting place for somebody who's new. Just drums, melody, bass, and a little counter melody. Try it out, practice, and that's pretty much it for this video. So I'll see you guys next week, where we're going to expand on this idea. I'm going to talk about how to take an 8-bar loop and turn it into more than just that. We're going to try and make this into like a full song. So basically everything that we've gone over today is going to apply to the next video. So stay tuned for that, and I look forward to seeing you next week, and take a listen to what the track sounds like now. Peace. Peace. I said a peace. Peace.